to thank Ben once again for helping to put all of this together, and really happy to be working with him, and that I'll be spending more time in Hong Kong. Oops. And then start here. He invited me. This is a continuation. So my talk is about living out of your mind, and this being the first Asian Humanity Plus conference and everything, I thought we'd take a new, and we're all into coining new titles, so we're going to look at the Eastern transhumanism. You know, and I know for most of the transhumanism that has been around so far has been primarily kind of a Western approach. Have you had many Asian perspectives or Eastern perspectives much? Or no? Yeah, so Western, so good. So this is the start of Eastern transhumanism. So I'm going to really look at this, and you know, in Asia here, we've had a long history of looking at these big issues that they've also been looking at in the West as well. And this being Hong Kong is a good kind of merging place between the two, or a synthesis place between the two. I thought I'd give this a shot, and I apologize. Again, I'd like to thank all the previous speakers, because I guess I was supposed to speak second or something, and I had to finish doing these slides. So this is a new talk, and I like doing new talks, and I was really happy to be. I had the privilege of speaking at Caltech late last year. It was a year ago, and the summary of the talk from last year, I'd like to kind of continue this year from kind of the end of last year's talk. Last year, my talk was .H points to H++, looking at kind of the future of transhumanism. And it was a bit of a, see Aubrey here too. I'm really happy because actually the first time I met Aubrey was at the TED in Monterey, where he gave a talk on how to be a heretic. And you still remember that talk? So here I am among heretics, and I hope to be the heretic among heretics. So, you know, with this and with that talk, if you missed this talk, it's available online on YouTube still. I talked about Fuss's technique of really looking at natural intelligence, of looking at things that are coming from nature versus from the mind, and really made a case for natural intelligence of Fuss's, and, you know, being aware of that. And really looking at it's not really about what we know, the intellectual side of that, but really looking at how we interrelate in terms of how we're using knowledge to either bring us closer together or further apart, and looking at where the action arises from. You know, whether it's kind of fear, need, desire, or joy. You know, and I postulated that joy was the natural state, and so acting from joy is different from acting from, physiologically feels different from acting from fear, need, or desire. And kind of really looking at understanding the underlying emotions behind actions. And so that was a quick summary of last year's talk. And so this year I'd like to continue, and this being the transhumanists, and we have the cryo people here, which is really cool. And so part of the, as one of the organizers, we have this organization here called Mind and Matter, and we've been organizing events. Next week we have this Asia Consciousness Festival. We're actually showing Tiffany Schlane's film, Connected, on Friday, which it's the Asian premiere of that film. And with this group, what we've been really looking at is the relationship between the mind, you know, where we're at right now in this conversation, and the body. So right now, physically, you're sitting kind of up there, I'm standing here, but in this conversation, except for maybe him, her, definitely him, them. Most of us seem to be listening to what I'm saying, and we seem to be in the same mental space, other than, well, now his phone's ringing. Well, so he's clearly not here, but so most of us are kind of here in this. And so we're really looking at the relationship between this mental space that we're in right now in this conversation and the physical body. So if I mention Caltech, for those of you that work at Caltech, you know, how is it that we understand it? Are there neurons in my brain that are wired? And when I mention Aubrey's speech, were there kind of neurons in my brain that are matched to his? in terms of understanding that. And what's the relationship between kind of the hardware of the physiology and the software of this mental realm, using the computer science kind of background to try to articulate this. And the key thing I'm going to try to get across with this talk today is a difference between experiential knowing and intellectual knowing. So we are kind of in this intellectual space right now, in the realm of the mind. We are right now, for those of you that are still with, we're all here, but for those of you that are listening to me, so for those of you that are still with me, we're kind of in a different place, and you can almost see that although physically we're in the same place, mentally we may be in different places. So there's a difference between intellectual knowing and experiential knowing. So there's a difference between knowing that 1 + 1 = 2, which is kind of an intellectual knowing, and knowing that you have to go to the bathroom. So if you had to go to the bathroom, we can argue 1 + 1 = 2. I could say that 1 + 1 = 1, because the plus is a logical OR, and we can debate that and argue that all we want. But if you really had to go to the bathroom, and I tried to argue to convince you that you didn't have to go to the bathroom, you'd be like, no, especially if it's like diarrhea or something. Still thinking about your talk yesterday. If you said, no, you don't have to go. It's just stomach pains. You'd be like, no, I think I know. So there's a difference. And if you look, there's a TED Talk, Daniel Kahneman gives a great talk between this kind of the experiencing self and the remembering self. He gives a great talk about how those things are different and how that makes it difficult to understand phenomenology and how people are experiencing things. So to kick this off a little bit, I had a great time. I was invited to give a talk at Banff, and we were going up to the glaciers, and I made a wrong turn, and we ended up at this place called Yoho National Park, which is known for these things called trilobites. Have you heard of these trilobites? So they have these fossils of these things, and I was pretty amazed. I looked at them, and these things they've been dated to 500 million years. So, and for me, it just boggled my mind that 500 million years ago, there was this kind of creature swimming around the sea. It got stuck in some mud, and then it got kind of fossilized, and, there's the skeleton, or there's the body of this creature 500 million years ago. And if we think of time, if you think about in the realm of time, there's, of 500 million years, seems a long time, and our universe has been around for about 11 billion years. Our sun's been around for 6 billion years. In another 6 billion years or so, it's going to go red giant, go white dwarf, latest science, etc. So from the scale of time, when we talk about life, my life is a pretty short time compared to these vast. So far, right? I'll get there too. That's part of it. And then if you think about space, right now, they say there are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on this planet. And actually, there's a Google reference. I found it. There are about 10 to the power of 20 grains of sand on this planet, and there are about 10 to the 20. So for every grain of sand on this planet, there are 100 stars in the universe. So from a space point of view, my body. From a space point of view, I'm getting it. From a space point of view, my body is fairly, I'm like nothing. And so I want to share a story because I used to be a professor, assistant professor at the time at USC. And I used to work late at night, and my office mate, who also works very late at night as well too, it's kind of interesting because it's like Ghost in the Halls. It'd be the two of us. His name's Bart Costco. He's a good friend of mine. I'd end up at his office at 2 in the morning. He'd come over, we'd coffee, we'd have deep discussions about different things. And the interesting thing about Bart is he wears this bracelet. And, at first I was kind of joking with him, wearing jewelry, etc. He's like, no, this bracelet means that when I die, they're going to chop my head off and freeze it. Is he upgraded to full body yet, or? He's just, okay, at the time it was just head. And I was like, well, that's quite interesting. And I was like, wow, pretty radical. And then I was like, well, he's like, well, and then he started explaining. That's when I first found about Alcor, etc. And it's like, well, they can reconstruct you. You wouldn't want to burn yourself, or why bury yourself when you can actually, in the future with technology, rebuild yourself. I'm like, okay, great. And I was like, well, what happens after 6 billion years when our sun goes red giant and white dwarf? I was like, well, 6 billion years, that's a long time. We'll be off this planet by then. Star Trek, I'm looking at, light years. I'm still trying to figure out this traveling faster than the speed of light thing, but, we'll have that figured out by then, because 6 billion years is a long time. I was like, well, what about 10 to the 100 years when all the electrons decay into the protons and we're awash in a sea of neutrons, and there's no energy? And then he looked at me and said, well, we'll get to that bridge. We'll worry about that when we get to that bridge, And so, again, it tied into time, and, because we have these transhumanists, and we have actually people that know Bart here, too. I thought I'd kind of throw this in here. And so if you look at your life, from a life expectancy point of view, 80 to, 1,000 years. So assuming our life is 80, even at 1,000 years, compared to the life of the universe to date, the time is still pretty minute. And then from a weight point of view, 8 kilograms versus 3 times 10 to the 50th kilograms being the whole universe, I'm pretty close next to nothing, in the grand scheme of things, right? So that's one side. So let's put that aside for a second. On the other side, for the last 20 years, I've been making video games. We design games, and then Ben just mentioned too this whole life is a video game thing, and we in video games we design games, and when I'm playing a game, I'm engaged in the game, I'm playing it, the game feels very real. But then when I turn the machine off, where does that game go? Where does that game world go? It just kind of disappears. You could say it's stored, but it's not really that game that I played, that instant that I played. And so if you really look at kind of real world as a video game, and this is what Ben was alluding to, I've actually got a slide for this, is really looking at what is this? What actually happens when I die? Do all of you still exist? Or do all of you disappear? And does all of this disappear when I die? And the interesting thing is these are two radically different worldviews. In one worldview, I'm pretty much nothing. Everything I'll ever do in my whole life, everything that we all collectively do in the bigger scope of things, amounts to pretty much zero. On the other side of the scale, I'm everything. From my direct experience perspective, as soon as I die, or I don't want to type, it's too egoic. Okay. As soon as Aubrey dies, Hong Kong, gone. China, gone. The United States, gone. This whole massive universe, gone. Right? And from a direct experience, and this is all, both of these are in the realm of the mind. And, just like, oh, you didn't show your continuity. Normally Jeff has his line. So somewhere you're on this, most people are somewhere on this line. They either believe this or they believe that, or they're somewhere in between. And they have a mentally constructed worldview which guides how they live their life based upon what they've been conditioned to understand and to live from. This is kind of this mental-based action that we're doing. But from a direct experience perspective, I don't know what's going to happen, right? From Aubrey's experience, direct experience perspective, will this world exist after you're gone?
I'm not intending to be gone.
Okay, I know. Well, even there, you had that curve that went up and down. There was an upper bound for that curve.
That's just health, not life.
Okay. So, well, I'm not expecting to be gone either, which is why we're all here. And so the thing about this is where you are on this is in the realm of the mind. This is an intellectual knowing, which is very different from the direct experience kind of knowing, like knowing that you have to go to the bathroom, which is more kind of physiologically informed. And so for most people, and the key thing about this is that the intellectual reality and the material, although they seem to blur for people in terms of what reality is, phenomenologically, they're very different. And anyone with young kids have probably heard, you probably, if you think back, there's this term, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names may never harm me. Okay, so physically, and part of my talk from last year is that physically, our emotions and our physiology were developed to keep us physically safe, but then as we develop the intellect, it kind of shanghaied this limbic system, etc. And so, so adrenaline, all of these ATH, all these things that we experience physiologically and can measure physiologically in the body that were developed from an evolutionary psychology point of view to keep us physically safe, have been mapped into this conceptual thing. So for those of you that are stock investors, if I tell you your stock portfolio just went to zero, you'd have a physiological response, a reaction to this, which can be measured chemically, etc. And so the whole point behind this is, although for many people it uses the same hardware, underlying hardware, the phenomenological experience of being in the mind or being in the body is different. And so the question for most people right now is, what motivates action? And for most people, it's going to be story. And so the story that motivates action is going to be worldview. And for most people, it's fear, need, desire, etc. and physiological state. So for me right now, for example, Kelly is flashing these signs. I have less than 5 minutes. Okay, so part of me is out of respect for all of you and all of this other stuff of the conference being on time. Part of me, my intention is hurry up, just finish this, cut it, etc. But then part of me is the other part of me. Another story in my head, so I'm going, wow, when am I ever going to get a chance to speak like this to you guys again? And so part of me wants to, and so they conflict, right? So part of me is like, okay, maybe I should just get off the stage now. The other part of me is going, oh, but I got to get this across. I want to communicate this because this is, and so you can see this, and they're entirely psychologically constructed. Right? So one is a story that, hey, we're in this context of this thing, and we have dinner and everything, although I am the last speaker. And then on the other side, we have this other story of me wanting to communicate and express because I feel like these ideas are important or not, or whatever, and I'm just trying to communicate with you. So this is a clear example of how the stories in our minds, our psychology, based upon our worldview, will influence how we behave and act. Okay, so this is kind of mentally constructed. And for all of us, we've constructed, and this is a slide from my last year's talk. I go into a little more in detail into this from last year's thing too, is we built this mental reality in our head, in terms of order of importance, the weather, understand what I'm saying, your current project, your job, your career, family, relationship with God, mortality. And so these are in terms of order of importance. Different people are going to be different, but this is roughly from an order of importance of the things that motivate action. This is a little bit more detailed version of the Maslow's hierarchy of need, pyramid type thing. But at the base of this, arguably, is this experience that right here and right now, it's good to be alive. Right? And so there's that force underneath that, which is an experiential thing. So if you let go of all the stories, you'll kind of rest into this realization that right here and right now it's good to be alive. And if you can connect to that and then work from that, what is it that takes you out of that? And that was last year's talk. And part of this is really looking at the map is not the target. So the ideas, the sticks and stones, will not break. Oh, the sticks and stones will break your bones, but the words and the stories and the ideas, if you don't treat them seriously, they won't harm them. It's not like a gun, for example. And so what we're interested in is really looking at is the development of the mind. So, how do we go from, someone like a baby to, and so as the physiology develops and as a person lives their life experience, how do they construct their worldview? How do these physiological processes in the body map to ideas and concepts in the realm of the mind? And so I've got a video here I'm not going to show, but it basically Watson's early experiments. You guys know all this stuff already. So in terms of how conditioning influences the mind. And so we've got this chart here. If you look at kind of mind and body, and we're right now assuming that the mind and the body it is embodied. So we have perception, we have the mind, and then we engage the material world. And so we have these physiological processes that bind into concepts and ideas. And so if I ask you to remember a certain story, when was the last time you were angry, you'll think about it and you'll notice that your breathing, your heart rate, all of these things will change, as this. So stories, for those of you that are in computer science, are like pointer references to some kind of a physiological state. So if you remember a story, it kind of sinks the physiology into that. It's like a pointer. And whether it's a real world or a video game world, from the cells of your body's point of view, they don't know the difference. Right? So they're just seeing these chemicals going by, arguably, etc. So this whole notion we're looking at is kind of this idea, if you can bring yourself fully present, is kind of this radical empiricism. So what if, right now, knowing the difference between what's coming from your mind versus what's coming from physically this moment. So I know the pressure that I'm getting and the glares that I'm getting from Kelly, looking at me, there's part of this is, the mind triggering, hey, I've got no time left, etc. And then what's coming from direct experience? But right now I feel a pressure, but she's not threatening me. There's no gun, this is the interesting thing that we're looking at. So what, if you can bring yourself fully present, for most people in the first world, third world, it's a different story. But for most people in the first world, if you can bring yourself fully present, right here and right now, everything's fine. So the natural state, arguably, for that is joy. But then the question is, if you can bring yourself fully present, and we had an earlier discussion here. And so with this, it's looking at what can you bring yourself present, and what if you lived your life as if everything that you could sense immediately around you was all that there was. And so earlier we had a discussion of, well, how do you eat, and how do you get a job, and all of this other stuff. And so the question is, how do we... And the question here with this stuff is, how does that which you think is you engage that which you think is not you? So as I'm engaging kind of this material world and things kind of happen back, how is this dance happening? How are we playing? How does that which I think is me playing with that which I think is not me? And how is this making me feel? And what is this kind of relationship? And it's really to look at that. And so this kind of, I like this picture of, a person playing in front of a mirror. And really, in a very sense, really looking at what is reality. And if you ask anyone in a very deep sense, oh, okay, we're in Hong Kong, but at a very deep level, the question is, what is this? And if you're really honest with yourself, and you ask yourself, you can say, oh, this is Hong Kong, oh, we're in China, and, oh, this is an H+ conference, and all this other stuff. But if you ask yourself at a very deep level, what is this? In general, the answer is, I have no idea. And so the question is, can you rest? And the argument is, if I don't even know what this is, what makes me think I know what any of this is? Right? And that's where these beliefs and everything are motivating the action. So the question is there a strategy? So now the material world is responding. See? So this is the play of this. And so the question here is looking at what is it that motivates people to act? And so again, the emotions of fear, need, and desire feel very different from joy. And so if you're looking at being able to act outside of thought, awareness, and wait, can you move your head for a second? Emergence and flow. Emergence and flow become very important as a qualitative way of looking at how do you respond to this moment, which is all I can really do anyways. And so really looking at as we develop, we've been talking about transhumanism as a society and as a culture, but then individually, how do we move from instinct, intellect, moving towards kind of intuition, insight, ways of knowing without knowing how you know, etc. And I think synchronicity, EQ, so a lot of this conditioning and understanding what are the emotional symbols, what are the symbols that trigger these emotional reactions, how do those influence my quality of life? And that's a very important thing. And as we unwind those springs that get tied up when we're born, then we rediscover our own intuition, insight, the way of knowing without knowing how you know. And your relationship with reality changes. And so what I'm asking you to do here with this, from an Eastern transhumanist perspective, is to join the club. And the first thing I'd like you to do is not believe anything I'm saying right now. Okay? Don't stay in this mental space. I'm using this mental thing as a virus, but I'm saying don't stay in this mental thing. Live your life as your life. See how reality is showing up for you. and live it in a reverent way. You know, you can go out and drink and do all these other, but you know, look at, you know, explore life with the curiosity that you do your research. Yeah, and you know, really look at things at literally how things show up. And then where are you on the hero's journey? So in terms of story, if you're going to use narrative and stuff, you know, to explain things, etc. And then, yeah, really looking at how you think. We're organizing this thing. Can't I use more? Thank you.